As a cabin crew member explodes in anger, she quickly discovers that facades hide unforeseen truths. Inside, the aircraft resonated with the soft murmur of whispered exchanges while travelers eased into their chairs. Designated as Flight 278 from Los Angeles to Miami, it appeared to be merely another coast-to-coast journey, as presumed by all. Among the travelers sat Elijah Barretta, a sharply attired gentleman in his mid-40s. His modest bearing and placid visage allowed him to merge effortlessly, yet the subtle magnetism of his quiet confidence distinctly marked him for discerning eyes. Settled in first class, Elijah repositioned his sleek leather carry-on tucked neatly beneath the seat ahead, then reclined as his eyes drifted toward the window, where dawn's radiance bathed his custom navy ensemble in a gentle, golden sheen. To him, this journey was far from extraordinary. It was merely a customary evaluation of his exclusive jet enterprise, Skyline Aviation, a premier luxury charter service, yet he never brandished his status, choosing instead to blend in seamlessly as an ordinary traveler, a practice that kept his feet firmly on the ground and echoed the very reason he founded the firm. Close by, a dedicated cabin attendant named Melissa Walker swept briskly through the cramped aisle with practiced efficiency, her meticulously maintained and confident smile permanently affixed, a seasoned professional in her early 30s who took immense pride in her standing, though today she teetered precariously on impatience, as a sudden, last-minute crew reshuffle coupled with an unforeseen boarding delay only further fueled her mounting irritation. Yet, undeniably, something about Elijah irked her profoundly. Perhaps it was his unexpectedly polite request for an extra water before departure, or maybe it was her own baseless preconceptions about his true identity. Either way, she sensed an invisible barrier rapidly rising within her and ultimately, one destined to ignite an inevitable, explosive confrontation. Neither of them foresaw the moment when the aircraft's engines thundered into action, launching the flight skyward as travelers reclined, absorbed in their digital screens or leisurely perusing glossy magazines. Melissa advanced to Elijah's row, her forced smile barely masking her irritation. "Sir, kindly ensure your tray table is stowed," she instructed in a voice notably devoid of its customary cordiality. Elijah looked up, his voice courteous yet resolute, remarking, "It already is." Melissa paused, her eyes narrowing as she keenly sensed the burgeoning tension in the air, yet she tried to dismiss it, convinced it was simply another unremarkable flight, until a seemingly minor misunderstanding began to spiral dramatically into an explosive outburst, leaving every passenger on board dumbfounded as the aircraft attained cruising height and the cabin gradually settled into an almost rhythmic, serene calm. Elijah reclined in his seat, retrieving a well-worn leather journal to scribble reflections in preparation for an imminent board meeting. Yet Melissa, with an unspoken vigilance, continued to observe him intently, uncertain of the precise cause, while a peculiar defiance in his demeanor effortlessly tapped into the reservoir of her rising irritation. It began with a modest request. Elijah hit the call button, and Melissa approached with a smile that now felt mechanical rather than warm. "Yes, sir," she responded in a curt tone. "May I have another water refill, please?" Elijah replied serenely while displaying his vacant cup. Melissa's jaw constricted ever so slightly as she paused, then murmured, "We are currently mid-service, sir. I'll attend to it as soon as possible." Elijah nodded, sensing her vexation yet opting for de-escalation, replying, "No problem, I'll wait." He returned to his notebook, oblivious to the stir his calm reply had ignited in Melissa. She moved down the aisle, her racing thoughts wondering, why does he carry an air as if the universe must yield to his wishes? This wasn't the inaugural instance of such irritation with a traveler, yet today the feeling struck a distinctly personal chord, leaving her unable to articulate its origin. Moments later, as she came back maneuvering the beverage cart, Elijah activated the call button once more. Melissa halted in mid-stride, casting a glance of unmistakable irritation, saying, "Sir, I've already informed you, I'll attend shortly." Elijah raised his eyes, his gaze composed yet inquisitive. "You've bypassed me twice already. I only activated the button, presuming you might have overlooked it." His words lingered in the cabin, so calm yet sharp, prompting a handful of passengers in adjacent rows to glance over, keenly aware of the rising tension. Melissa felt a sudden warmth rise in her cheeks as her mounting frustration bubbled over. "Sir, there's no necessity to repeatedly press the button. Our system is in place, and I shall attend to you in due course." "I understand," Elijah stated, his tone even yet resolute, "but if you are agitated, perhaps we might settle this matter discreetly away from prying eyes." That was the breaking point for Melissa. His tone was not merely unfriendly but soaked in condescension. She inched nearer, encroaching upon his space, and hissed, "Excuse me," her voice low yet piercing enough for nearby passengers to catch every word. Elijah remained unmoved, calmly asserting, I believe you've misconstrued my intent. I am merely requesting a modicum of courtesy. At this point, the charged atmosphere was almost tangible. A gentleman 2 rows behind murmured to his partner, what on earth is happening? A fellow crew member cast a worried look her way, subtly shaking his head as if urging her to relent, yet it was already too late. In a sudden burst, Melissa snapped, you have no right to sermonize about courtesy, sir, her voice rising and capturing the focus of almost every first-class traveler. And then, in an instant, came the slap, quiet in volume yet crisp enough to plunge the cabin into an awed, stunned silence. Elijah reclined just a bit, his hand reflexively gliding over the spot where hers had struck, and his expression transformed, not into anger, but into a gaze sharpened by profound disappointment. Silence extended, almost unbearably, as passengers gaped in shock at the unfolding scene. Melissa's hand remained suspended in the air, frozen as if her mind had yet to register the calamity. Meanwhile, a coworker hurried over, his voice hushed and frantic. Melissa, what are you doing? He stammered, her face paling as the irreversible damage settled in. That moment seemed to stretch into eternity, yet the stark truth was that everything was poised to change, and the aghast onlookers were on the brink of discovering the true identity of Elijah Barrett. A suffocating silence enveloped the cabin while Melissa remained paralyzed, her expression a turbulent mix of bewilderment and alarm. Elijah kept his cool, his poise intact even as the faint imprint of her hand lingered on his cheek. Meanwhile, passengers traded astonished, wide-eyed glances while murmuring softly among themselves. No one dared to speak directly, except for a man seated just a row behind Elijah, who declared, that behavior is unacceptable. His voice, resolute yet measured, carried a gravity that sliced through the charged atmosphere like a finely honed blade. Melissa's coworker moved in closer, attempting to quell the escalating tension, while Melissa stepped back. He urgently murmured, you need to stop, but she remained rooted, her breath shallow and her thoughts whirling as she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the unfolding incident. At last, Elijah shattered the silence, his tone even and composed yet carrying a clear, incisive bite. Miss Walker, he intoned, invoking the name on her badge, I believe it's time for us to engage in a conversation. Melissa's voice cracked as her hands trembled, and she began, I was just. Elijah softly lifted his hand to quiet her, his voice measured yet imbued with authority, not here, but you'll want to listen. Greg, a seasoned senior attendant and her colleague, swiftly interjected, Sir, I sincerely apologize for this incident, please allow us the opportunity to set things right. Elijah's gaze shifted toward Greg, offering him a slight nod as he remarked, you may want to summon the captain. Instantly, the room appeared to contract as the gravity of his words sank into everyone. Greg paused briefly before moving toward the cockpit, leaving Melissa behind, standing there, visibly pale and unsteady. Elijah dug into his pocket, pulling out his phone as he browsed his contacts. Meanwhile, a handful of curious passengers edged closer, intrigued by his actions. Then a gasp caught through the murmur, oh my God, a woman whispered to her husband, that's Elijah Barrett, he owns this airline. Instantly, a ripple spread, as murmurs intensified and every gaze flitted between Elijah and Melissa. Melissa's cheeks flushed a deep crimson as she grasped the enormity of her actions. Soon, Greg reappeared accompanied by the captain, whose expression mingled bewilderment and alarm. Mr. Barrett, began the captain with cautious reserve, we have been notified of an incident. How would you like us to proceed? Elijah's eyes swept over Melissa, who now appeared as if she wished to vanish into the floor. He exhaled deeply, his demeanor softening slightly as he said, let's handle this matter professionally for now, I'd appreciate a private word with your crew. Yet, this was only the prologue, the revelation marked merely the inception of a day that none aboard this flight would ever forget. The captain guided Elijah into the modest crew lounge at the front of the plane, while Melissa remained in the main cabin, immobilized as the gazes of every passenger bore into her. Greg softly urged her to sit down, yet she declined, her stubborn pride and burgeoning panic anchoring her in place. As whispers swelled around her, fragments of conversation drifted through the cabin. I can't believe she did that, someone whispered, slapping your own superior is career suicide, did she even realize who he was? Melissa felt her stomach twist as those words struck her like a freight train. She stammered, what are you talking about? He's merely a passenger. Elijah lifted his eyes from his phone, locking his gaze with unwavering intensity. Melissa, he declared, his tone low yet resolute, I am not merely a passenger, I am the CEO of Skyline Aviation, and in this moment, you represent my company. His declaration struck her like a surging wave, leaving her knees trembling. Meanwhile, the murmurs among passengers intensified as some began recording the incident on their phones. Elijah kept his cool, his poise intact even as the faint imprint of her hand lingered on his cheek. Passengers traded astonished, wide-eyed glances while murmuring softly among themselves. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's career," he declared after a measured pause, "but I am determined to ensure that my company is always synonymous with respect and utmost professionalism." Greg nodded vigorously. "We understand, sir." Melissa's behavior was entirely unacceptable, but before he could continue, Elijah interjected, his voice incisive yet not wrathful. Greg fell silent as Elijah leaned in, his tone low and piercing. "I want to understand exactly what precipitated this. No one acts so out of line without a reason. Is there an undercurrent at play behind the scenes? I need to know the story." Elijah interjected once more, his voice steady and authoritative. "Pressure does not justify boundary violations. I need to know, is this incident a sign of a broader systemic issue, or merely an isolated lapse?" Greg shifted uneasily, casting anxious glances at the captain for reassurance. After a brief pause, the captain cleared his throat and confessed, "We have experienced significant crew turnover recently, leaving us understaffed, and Melissa has been burdened with extra shifts. Although there have been prior complaints about her attitude, this is the first time the situation has escalated to this extent." Elijah reclined in his seat, absorbing the revelations as he drummed his fingers softly on the table. The silence lingered just long enough to cause discomfort before he finally spoke. "This isn't solely about me," he declared. "It concerns everyone. What you witnessed today falls far short of the values my company embodies." Meanwhile, in the cabin, Melissa bore the heavy weight of judgment as several passengers glared openly at her, while others shook their heads, their collective disapproval radiating from every corner. A young woman across the aisle finally shattered the silence, inquiring softly yet resolutely, "Why would you do that? He doesn't deserve such treatment." Melissa attempted to reply, but her voice faltered. No words emerged, for she had no answer, none that could appease anyone, least of all herself. Yet as she lingered, the crew lounge door swung open and Elijah emerged, his face inscrutable. What he uttered next would alter everything. Elijah positioned himself at the forefront of the cabin, his serene yet authoritative demeanor capturing every gaze. Passengers leaned forward, their curiosity aflame with anticipation of his next words. Melissa, lingering by the galley, appeared as if she longed to vanish into the floor. Elijah's eyes scanned the entire room before finally settling on her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he commenced in a measured tone, "I owe you all an explanation for the events that have just unfolded." Instantly, all murmurs subsided, and the cabin was enveloped in silence as he pressed on. "First, allow me to clarify, I am Elijah Barrett, the CEO of Skyline Aviation. What you witnessed today does not reflect the high standard of professionalism and respect that I demand from my team or anyone associated with my company." Several passengers nodded in silent accord, their faces softening as they grasped the gravity of the moment. Melissa's gaze dropped to the floor, her hands clenched tightly in front of her. Elijah moved a step nearer, yet his tone remained gentle as he spoke to her directly. "Melissa," he said, "I cannot claim to fully grasp all that you are enduring, but what transpired earlier was not solely about me, it concerns the manner in which we, as human beings, treat one another. You did not truly see me, rather, you witnessed the frustration and assumptions you harbored in that instant, and therein lies the crux of our problem." Melissa raised her eyes, tears pooling within, and whispered, I am so sorry. "I didn't mean to," he began, cutting her off softly, "but intent is not equivalent to impact. What you did might have spiraled into far graver consequences, and that is precisely why we must discuss this now." He shifted his focus back to the passengers, his tone softening into reflective earnestness. "Today's events serve as a reminder to us all. It is far too easy to allow stress and assumptions to obscure our judgment, yet every action we commit and every word we utter carries its own consequences, whether apparent at once or not." The cabin fell utterly silent, the weight of his words lingering in the air. Elijah drew a deep breath before proceeding. "This matter is not solely about workplace respect or in-flight professionalism, it is about the way we perceive one another, particularly when we remain unaware of each other's stories." A soft, reflective round of applause rippled through the passengers, their initial shock giving way to a collective sense of understanding. Melissa brushed away a tear from her cheek, her face reflecting both remorse and a quiet gratitude. Elijah faced her once more, his tone gentle yet resolute. "You will be held accountable for your actions today. but I urge you to view this moment not merely as an error, but as a chance for personal growth. You can do better, Melissa, and I sincerely hope you will. Melissa gave a barely audible nod. Thank you, I will. Yet Elijah was not finished. He had one final remark, one more decisive step that would etch an indelible impression on every passenger. Elijah cast one last, sweeping glance around the cabin, the resonance of his words still palpable in the air. Before we proceed with this flight, I must ensure that no one here feels unsafe or disrespected. This applies equally to both passengers and crew. He paused, allowing his words to resonate, then turned to the captain. I'd like to speak with Melissa privately one final time before we land. We will resolve the remainder of this issue after the flight. The captain nodded and motioned toward the galley, where Elijah and Melissa proceeded to converse in privacy, shielded from the inquisitive gazes of the passengers in the cramped space. Within that tight space, Melissa appeared diminished, her characteristic confidence supplanted by raw vulnerability as she met Elijah's steady gaze, her voice quivering. I know I cannot undo what I have done, she confessed, but please understand how deeply sorry I am. Elijah regarded her thoughtfully before replying, I believe you are remorseful, Melissa, yet mere apologies will not mend the damage. I require assurance that you will learn from this ordeal and allow it to transform you for the better. Melissa nodded earnestly, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering, I will, I promise. Elijah exhaled slowly and stepped back. Good, he remarked, because respect, Melissa, isn't defined by titles or uniforms, it's rooted in our shared humanity. If you fail to see people as they truly are, you will find yourself on the wrong side of situations that could have been avoided. With that, he exited the galley and resumed his seat, while passengers observed him, their eyes reflecting a blend of admiration and gratitude. Meanwhile, Melissa remained behind to confront the repercussions of her actions. Yet, something within her had shifted. It was not merely an ending, but the dawn of a new beginning, a chance to perceive the world and its inhabitants with renewed clarity. For often, the most piercing lessons are those that drive us to evolve into superior versions of ourselves. Tales such as this underscore the enduring power of respect, humility, and understanding. It is all too easy to succumb to assumptions or let frustration dominate, yet the repercussions can reverberate far beyond our expectations. May this story serve as a reminder to pause, reflect, and choose kindness even when it is most challenging.